There are days that carve themselves into your bones, not with the sharpness of a blade, but with the dull, relentless ache of something that refuses to leave. Mine began like any other, unremarkable, with a kind of casual monotony I had once mistaken for stability. I used to think life unraveled with drama, with fire and sirens and screaming skies. But in truth, it often falls apart quietly, like a thread snapping somewhere deep inside a tapestry, so small and unnoticeable at first that by the time you see the whole fabric is already undone. Before that day, I had been many things: an employee who never missed deadlines, a son who called home on Sundays, a friend who remembered birthdays, a man with plans. My calendar was full, my phone busy, my nights short. I mistook movement for meaning. I mistook surviving for living. And then it happened. I will not give the moment power by describing it in all its details. What matters is that I lost someone who made life feel anchored, someone who made my days more than just the slow turning of the clock. It was sudden, senseless, and it hollowed me out in ways I did not think possible. One phone call, one sentence, that was all it took. After that, the days became shapeless. They bled into one another like watercolors running down a canvas, indistinguishable and formless. I learned that grief is not loud. It is not cinematic. It is not the wailing at funerals you see in films or the kind of crying that racks the whole body in a cleansing, cathartic way. Grief is quieter than that. It is the refusal to move from bed because standing up would mean admitting the world still turns. It is the numbness that sets in so deeply that you forget the sound of your own voice. It is existing in a house full of things, but feeling like none of them belong to you anymore. I stopped eating much. I stopped working. I stopped answering texts. I stopped answering the door. I think I even stopped breathing properly. My lungs pulled air, but it felt like there was no purpose in doing so. In that fog, time became irrelevant. I could not have told you if a week had passed or a month. I only knew night from day by the quality of the light in the room. My phone buzzed often at first. Then it didn't. People stop trying eventually. They always do. I was not living. I was waiting. For what? I didn't know. And then came the dog. It wasn't some grand decision, no well-thought-out plan. I had not woken up one morning determined to change, or to heal, or to fill the gaping hole in my chest with fur and wagging tails. The truth is far simpler, far messier. I saw him by chance, a living creature in a world that had turned gray, a pair of dark eyes that looked at me not with pity, not with the empty stares of people who don't know what to say, but with something older, something I could not name. He came into my life the way rain comes to cracked earth, not as a flood, not even as a drizzle, just a few drops, just enough to make the dust shift, to hint that something still lived beneath the dry, lifeless surface. I didn't know what to do with him. I barely knew what to do with myself. But suddenly there was this small creature who needed to be fed, who needed walks, who had needs that did not care about my grief. He didn't understand death. He didn't understand loss. He understood hunger. He understood the door opening. He understood the rhythm of a leash being clipped onto his collar and the sound of steps leading outside. At first, I resented it. The inconvenience. The way he forced me to exist in a world I wanted nothing to do with. The way his needs interrupted my grief like an unwelcome guest barging into a wake. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, I began to notice things. The way the wind felt on my face when we stood outside. The way the leaves shifted when the seasons changed, though I had barely been aware they were changing at all. The way he looked at me, patient and unyielding, like he had all the time in the world to wait for me to remember how to live. He was not a cure. Dogs are not magic. They cannot bring back the dead or erase the kind of hurt that keeps you awake at 3 a.m., staring at the ceiling. But he was a thread, a single, fragile thread pulling me back to the surface. I began to notice the structure he created around my days. Morning walks, meals, water bowls to refill. Small things, insignificant on their own, but strung together, they formed the faintest outline of a life. I still cried. I still woke up with that hollow feeling like I'd been scooped out from the inside. But now, there was a heartbeat next to me, curled at my feet or resting against my side, a living reminder that I wasn't entirely alone in the wreckage. If the day everything fell apart carved grief into my bones, then this dog, this unexpected, unasked for companion, carved something else there too, the faintest outline of hope. Some nights press themselves into memory with such force that they become part of you, inseparable from bone and blood. This was one of them. The day had been unremarkable, one of those endless gray stretches that made up most of my existence. The cold had deepened. Even the dog's paws hesitated against the frozen ground. We walked briefly, ate quietly, and returned to the house where nothing waited for us but silence. It had been weeks, months, perhaps, since I had felt anything that could be called alive. The dog gave me purpose in the smallest of ways, but there are places within grief that even companionship cannot reach. There is a darkness that does not simply settle on your shoulders, but seeps into the marrow. That night, it rose again. It was the kind of night where the weight of loss became unbearable, where every object in the house felt like a reminder of what was gone. The air itself seemed heavier, pressing against my lungs, making every breath an effort. The dog slept at my feet, oblivious to the storm raging inside me. I remember standing in the kitchen, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound in the room. I remember staring at the faint reflection of myself in the window, hollow-eyed, slack-shouldered, more ghost than man. And I remember, with a kind of terrible clarity, deciding that I could not do it anymore. It was not an impulsive thought. It had been there for some time, waiting like a shadow at the edge of my vision. That night, it stepped forward. I will not write what I planned. Some things are better left unspoken. But I know this. I was ready to leave. Not the house, not the city, but everything. I had convinced myself there was nothing left worth staying for. And then I heard him. It wasn't a bark, not at first. It was a low sound, a whine, soft and trembling, as if pulled from the deepest part of him. I turned, and there he was, awake now, standing in the doorway of the kitchen. His eyes locked on mine, unblinking. I froze. Something in his gaze pierced through the fog. It wasn't the vacant look of an animal reacting to movement. It was knowing. It was as if he saw exactly what I intended to do and was pleading without words. Then came the bark. Loud, sharp, urgent. He trotted toward me, nails clicking against the tile, and pushed his head against my leg with a force that nearly knocked me back. When I didn't move, he barked again, louder this time, insistent. And when that failed, he did something he had never done before. He leapt up, placing his paws on my chest, his weight pressing into me until I had no choice but to catch him. It was as if he was anchoring me to the world, pulling me back by sheer force of will. I don't remember how long I stood there with him pressed against me. Minutes, hours. Time fractured in that moment, collapsing into nothing but the warmth of his body against mine, the steady thud of his heart, the quiet truth of his existence. He didn't understand death. He didn't understand despair. But he understood me. And in that instant, I realized what his presence had truly meant all along. He had not been sent to fill the void left by my loss. He had been sent to keep me from becoming one. When I finally moved, it wasn't toward the thing I had planned. It was toward him. I sank to the floor, and he crawled into my lap, curling himself into a tight ball as if to shield me from myself. I cannot explain what shifted in me that night. Perhaps it was his timing. Perhaps it was the raw, unfiltered instinct of an animal refusing to let me disappear. But I know this: he saved my life. Not metaphorically, not symbolically. Truly, if he had not been there, awake when he should have been asleep, vigilant when I wanted no witness, I would not be writing these words. The night stretched on, but it felt different now. The darkness was still there. It always would be. But so was he, a silent guardian, a reminder that even in the deepest loneliness, I was not entirely alone. And for the first time in a long while, I chose to stay. In the weeks that followed that night, I found myself returning to the moment again and again. The kitchen, the cold tile beneath my feet, his weight pressing into me like an anchor. It replayed in fragments, not as a memory, but as a warning and a promise. I had been ready to disappear, and he had refused to let me. It was humbling. It is one thing to imagine being saved by another person, by someone who understands the complexity of your pain. But to be saved by a creature who asks nothing of you except food, warmth, and your presence, it strips survival down to its barest form. It is not about philosophy or reason. It is about staying because something in the world still needs you. And he needed me. The days began to take on shape again, not because the grief was gone, but because his presence demanded structure. He woke me at the same time every morning, his nails clicking softly against the bedroom floor, his head resting against the mattress until I stirred. There was no room for hesitation. He had to be fed. He had to be walked. He had to be cared for. I had been living as though I were waiting for something to end. But the dog did not wait. He moved through each day with the same simple rhythm, unaware of my brokenness. And in doing so, he taught me how to keep moving, too. Our walks grew longer. At first, they had been perfunctory, a brief loop through the neighborhood, my head down, my body as still as it could be while in motion. But now he pulled me further, into streets I hadn't walked in years, past the park where I used to go when life still felt like something I belonged to. down trails littered with leaves and roots, where the world felt untouched and unbothered by my grief. The world looked different when I followed him. It wasn't beautiful, not yet, but it was detailed. The crunch of frost beneath my boots, the distant call of a crow, the way his fur glowed faintly in the pale winter light. I began to notice things, small things, that tethered me to the present. Inside the house, I started to reclaim spaces I had abandoned. The kitchen became more than a place where I stood in the dark. I began cooking again, not much, but enough. A meal for me, a meal for him. I cleared the dust from the living room shelves, opened the curtains I had kept closed for months. It wasn't healing, not yet, but it was living. I thought often about the boy I had once been, the one who woke up with plans, who felt the days were filled with purpose. I didn't know if that version of me still existed, but the dog didn't care who I had been. He cared only for who I was now. And in his quiet way, he asked me to show up, not for the future or the past, but for the small, unremarkable moments we shared in the present. One night, I caught myself laughing. It startled me, the sound of it, foreign in my own mouth. He had been sprawled on his back, legs in the air, his tongue lolling out in that ridiculous way dogs can make themselves look both undignified and utterly at peace. Something inside me loosened, just for a moment, enough to let a sliver of joy through. I think that was when I understood. He hadn't just saved my life that night in the kitchen. He was saving it every day after, in small, unnoticeable ways. In his need for routine, in his insistence on walks, in his simple, relentless companionship. Grief still lived with me. Some days, it sat quietly in the corner. Other days, it consumed the room. But I no longer faced it alone. And slowly, painfully, I began to believe that maybe survival wasn't just about staying. Maybe it was about learning, in the smallest ways, to live again. Spring came late that year, as if the world itself had hesitated before deciding it was safe to bloom again. I felt the same. My days were no longer hollow, but they still carried the echo of what had been lost. The dog didn't care for echoes. He pulled me outside into the thawing air, his paws splashing through shallow puddles, nose pressed to the earth where life was beginning to push through the frost. He did not dwell on seasons past. He simply lived in the one that was here. It had been months since the night in the kitchen. In that time, I had rebuilt routines, stitched together the pieces of a life that had once felt beyond repair. I wasn't healed. I wasn't whole. But I was here. And for the first time in longer than I could remember, I wanted to stay. And then came the night he saved me again. It was late, the house quiet except for the hum of the heater. I had dozed off in the chair by the window, lulled into an uneasy sleep. I woke not to a sound, but to movement, sharp and sudden, the dog barking furiously, his body rigid and alert. At first, I didn't understand. Then I smelled it. Smoke. It was faint, curling up from somewhere deeper in the house. I stumbled to my feet, heart hammering, and followed his frantic barking to the kitchen. The old wiring in the wall by the stove had sparked, a slow, smoldering fire just beginning to take hold, filling the air with heat and smoke. I froze. For a terrible second, I could only stand there, staring at the creeping flames as if they were inevitable. My body locked in the way it once had in grief, motionless, waiting for the end. But he barked again, loud, demanding, alive, and it broke the spell. I grabbed the extinguisher, doused the fire, opened every window to push out the smoke. My hands shook, my lungs burned, my heart felt like it was clawing its way out of my chest. But the house did not burn. When it was over, I sat on the floor, back against the cabinets, trembling. He came to me then, his tail low but wagging, pressing himself against my side. No fear, no judgment, just presence. And in that moment, I understood the truth that had been forming for months. I wasn't alive by accident. I was alive because of him. Not just because he had saved me from myself that night in the kitchen. Not just because he had woken me before the flames could spread, but because he had given me something I hadn't had in so long, a reason to keep choosing life. The house smelled of smoke for days, but I didn't mind. It was a reminder, not of what almost happened, but of what hadn't. As the weeks passed, I noticed something subtle within myself. The darkness was still there, but it no longer defined me. The grief was still heavy, but it no longer pinned me down. I had begun to make peace with my own survival. The dog never asked for thanks. He never asked for recognition. He only asked for my presence, my care, my willingness to walk beside him through each day. And I gave him that, gladly. I do not know what the future holds. I still have days where the world feels unbearable, but I no longer walk through those days alone. He saved my life twice, once from myself, once from the fire. But perhaps the greatest saving wasn't in those moments at all. It was in everything in between. In the mornings when he pulled me out of bed. In the evenings when he curled against me, silent and steady. In the countless ordinary days that became possible because he existed. People often ask if dogs know when they've saved someone. I don't know. Maybe he does. Maybe he doesn't. But I know, and that is enough.